All right, welcome back. I'd like to move ahead with the next phase. This is the next in our series of special sessions that we're conducting. I'd like to introduce John Crystal. He's going to talk about the novel approach they've taken for biological psychiatry cover art. So John, please.
Thank you, Jerry. This has been a really fun meeting. So I'm here in my capacity as editor of the Biological Psychiatry. And an issue which I think has been important for our field. Let's see if we can get the slides up. Yeah, there we go. So this project, which we've called the Biological Psychiatry Cover Art Initiative, to address the underrepresentation of Black people on the journal cover through a series of commissioned artworks. This project really came alive for me over a number of years. We had a collection of the chairs of the departments of psychiatry, who were all old white men, and we had their paintings in the conference room of our department. And a number of the residents, particularly from underrepresented groups, felt that they did not see themselves in the portraits of the chairs of the Department of Psychiatry. And we had a number of discussions about this, about how uncomfortable and how disconnected they felt from those paintings and the message that they heard, that they felt that those paintings were sending to them, which is that they didn't have a place in the department. They were just visitors or guests in the department, not really a core part of the department community. And as a result of those discussions, we decided to take those paintings down and move them away from the room where the residents received their training. And I intellectually understood it, but I didn't experientially understand it until one day when I had a meeting with the president of our university. It's Yale University. Yale University was founded in 1701. And when you go to visit the president of Yale University, you enter the building that has all of the presidents of Yale University from 1701 to the current time lining the hallways. And so that was a very striking experience for me because I'm Jewish, and I walked in there, and the first 30 presidents of Yale University were all ministers, and then there wasn't a Jewish president of Yale from 1701 until 1993. So there's a lot of people who are not Jewish. And I felt, as I walked into that building and saw all those paintings, like I was a visitor, like I didn't have a place in the community, like I didn't belong. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that if you're in a place and all the images that you see are of people that are different from you, and you don't see your own picture mirrored in the artwork that surrounds you all the time, that you feel disconnected. You don't feel like you belong. That hit me. When it hit me like a ton of bricks, I began to realize that the covers of biological psychiatry might be sending the same message to scientists in our field. The Society of Biological Psychiatry is committed to having a diverse research community, committed to seeing the representation of people in research from all sorts of groups to address the critical health disparities that we have in our society. And yet our cover, our journal cover, and in fact, I would say almost every cover of every journal fails to represent the experience of brown and Black people. And so we had the idea that we should do something about that. And I don't know how it came that I reached out to Nee to talk about this, but Nee Addy are also on our panel today, a faculty member at Yale who has a role in the dean's office, not only in the Department of Psychiatry, but in the dean's office to address diversity of scientists. And I began a discussion about this, and we hatched this idea of the Cover Arts Project. And the idea was that we would commission artwork, and the artwork would represent the experience of brown and black people and be related to the themes of issues of biological psychiatry. And that was a great idea, except for me, I had one little problem, which is I don't know any artists. And I didn't know who to appreciate. And I'm always just overwhelmed by the range of opportunities. So, but Nee did. And Nee introduced us to the third party on this panel, and by far the most important person here today, who will very shortly introduce you to his artwork. And this Ima Ime, and what came out of this was discussions. In other words, this story you're going to hear wasn't. We didn't just reach out to Ima and then say, "Okay, paint some paintings." It was a process of getting to know each other and understand where each of us were coming from, and the artworks became a consequence of an evolved vision of what it meant to take this on. And he will say much more about this, but part of this process ended up hinging on, was this an authentic effort? Were we serious about what we were trying to take on, or was this just a gesture? And this question, for those of you who have administrative responsibilities in your institutions, you know that this is a fundamental issue whenever we try to address issues of the legacy of the impact of racism in our academic communities. And that was where we started out. And we're going to hear more about that today. So what we thought we would try to do is, first, you're going to hear about the artwork. And you're going to see the 6 incredible pieces of art that were commissioned. And I want to particularly thank the leaders of the Society of Biological Psychiatry for investing in this project, which was a substantial financial commitment for the society, but I think an extremely important one. And just to give you an idea of how impactful this art is, I believe we are on track for these 6 artworks to be on display at the National Academies of Science, which will be, I think, a very important statement, not just of our contribution, but the really quality and impact of these paintings. Then Nee is going to lead the 3 of us in a discussion for a period of time, and then we're going to open up the discussion for everybody here today. And I really hope you will join us in thinking about this effort and initiative. And it's been, I'll just say, just an absolutely wonderful experience to work with both of these gentlemen in this effort. And I want to also acknowledge Rosa Garces, who's from Biological Psychiatry, who's here today, who has kept us on track. Thank you very much, Rosa. And yes, I like to say Biological Psychiatry has the best staff in publishing. She's really just, our whole team is just wonderful. And then we'll have an open discussion, and also Jonathan Neal, who also participated in a number of these discussions. So without further ado, Ima, please.
Good afternoon, good morning, afternoon, almost afternoon. My name is Dr. Iman Nse-Ime, and I'm a professor of art and art history at Westfield State University in Massachusetts, for some reason speaking to a group of scientists. And I'm so honored to be here, and thank you so much, Dr. Crystal, for this wonderful opportunity and this amazing introduction that has made me more emotional than I expected to be. It's a big project, bigger than I anticipated at the very beginning, because it means so much more to me now than it did at the start. And I should set the scene before going into the 6 works and my process. At the time that Dr. Crystal and Dr. Addy are having conversations with me, you have to understand that the world has just been like set on fire. Like right after COVID, we've just watched a 9-minute video of a black man being killed. Whatever political, wherever you stand, somebody died in a horrific way, right? And there are protests, and there's a political energy in the atmosphere as well. And in that space, I was in my studio working on a set of projects that involved large angelic figures that were bound to the skins of black boys and men to serve as witnesses to what black people here were facing, were feeling at the time. Because all I had at that time were prayers. It was a very devastating time. And so building trust was a very big deal for me. And so to hear how this was for you means a lot to me. At that time, as a product of Yale University, PhD work in the art history department, as a product of Columbia University in the art history department, I have been in majority white institutions as the lone or one of very few black people excelling there. So I know what it feels like to not see your face and to still have to strive. And so these works come out of that space. And I want to begin that conversation by just kind of introducing you to the project materials. And these are, on a surface level, are just materials, right? But I wanted you to understand where I start, because I think that they have a larger place in the meanings of the work. And also, you don't speak to a group of scientists without showing, this kind. I'm feeling like this is a more science. Look, I'm trying here. Look, I was almost a cognitive neuroscience major because I fell in love with it so much, but now I only have like random words. I don't know what Wernicke's area is, but I know it still. I have no reason to know what a hippocampus is, but I know, look, these things enter my work still in strange ways. Phineas Gage's story is interesting to me, right, on a larger level. But I tried to set this up scientifically, okay? I work on unstretched canvas for these works. There's 6 of them. They're almost 7 feet tall, so you get a sense of the gravity of the works. They're not small. India ink and acrylic ink. These are materials where I use water on the ground with the canvases to wash color onto the works, sometimes onto the blank canvas, sometimes on top of the works as a destructive but additive layer to the project I'm developing. Something that you can't control very well, water, is a big part of the works. Oil paint on some of the works, charcoal and graphite on most of the works as a final layer of of strength. My greatest strength is with drawing, and so charcoal and graphite are big components of the work. But there's something about the everyday nature of them. Children play with charcoal. We rolled around in dust as children, right? Everybody has a pencil, graphite. And so there's a way that these are every man's tools for everyday life. And I like the simplicity of those tools to tell complex stories. How do you move forward? Oh, that's how. So here's some of the works, all of the works. I won't talk about all of them specifically because we don't have that kind of time. The Memory Tower is one where I introduce self-portraiture into the work to have a conversation about memory collapse, disintegration. The circadian time signature brings together ideas of sleep, sleeplessness, sleep disruption, but I'm also thinking about time and timekeeping in a musical manner. The final portrait in circadian time signature, which I'll talk about more later, shows up at the very end of the work. I had no idea she was going to show up. She showed up, and now she's there, and she's actually the prominent figure. So there's a way that these works told me what they were going to be, as opposed to my own planning. Synaptic Apocalypse. Heir Apparent. The passing down of both the beauty and the traumas from one generation to the next. And we'll talk more about that work soon. We Are the Noise. The model for this work has a very large family. And they recently moved into a neighborhood. They're like the only black people in the neighborhood. And I said, how's the new neighborhood? He's like, well, we are the noise. And I was like, what does that mean? And he's like, oh, no, it's a beautiful thing. They know we're here because we make all the, but it's sounds of children laughing and playing and so on and so forth. And he's someone I know personally, this model, but him as a praying man meant a lot to me for this series. And his words became the title of the work. Tears of Icarus. I may have some time to talk more about this piece later. That is an introduction to the 6 works. At the beginning, look, I'm using certain words that have scientific meanings. I promise you they are not scientific meanings here, okay? So bioformulations, whatever Google tells you, whatever you know them to be, I am using these words to describe these forms that have shown up in my works for years. They are abstract forms, but I don't consider myself an abstract artist. So I don't like saying I use abstract forms. I don't believe they're abstract at all. I think that they are the elements of things that are alive. That's how I feel about these forms that I make. And they show up in a lot of my works. At the time that I was creating, right before I started working on the biological psychiatry cover images, I had entered a space of creation where I was only working on these bioforms, as I call them. And they do become architectures that figures can live in, and they do become or are prayers that I'm creating as I'm working on these pieces. They have more than just linear properties. And so I don't know what else to call them. So I've turned to science. Here's an example of one of them. This is a foundational bioformation of the piece that will become Heir Apparent, my favorite work in the series of 6. And this work was so strong in my studio. I'm giving you an example of what it looks like here next to me as I'm working, so you get a sense of the scale of the works. It was such a strong work at the time that I was thinking about submitting this as the journal cover itself, without any figuration in the work. Later on, figures decided to appear, and I went along with it, and it made sense as a completed work. But here's how the figures found their ways into the work. It's really a matriarchal theme in this work here. The love and the care and the grace of a mother passing down her information to this next generation, maybe a child. But I was interested in what gets passed down as not just things you learn, like everyday things you learn, but also generational things, whether those are generational generational joys or generational traumas. I was interested in having a larger conversation that connects my community, my communities, my Black communities, right? I'm Nigerian American. There's so many different kinds of Black people. I wanted to connect our community to this conversation of science and to this conversation of faith, which is such a big part of our communities. Is it enough to speak about a psychiatric disorder or problem without also dealing with the very, very, very real remedy of prayer and faith that is such a big part of our communities? I don't think it is. And so the reason why these works are so connected to the images I was creating, during the pandemic, those faith images, those prayers, those angelic beings, is because I don't know how you talk about remedy or even disorders in the absence of faith. And these works are that for me. My strong suit is figuration in works, portraiture, hands and bodies that are moving. And so the bringing together of these bioforms, these abstracted forms, with these more solid forms is what makes the series look like what it looks. These are charcoal renderings. Charcoal plays a very important role in the works, and maybe during conversation we can talk about that, so I don't have to overstate it here. This is just an example of how the bioform then fuses with the solid forms, and then with color. So there's a lot of taking the images off the wall and putting them on the ground. It is noteworthy that I can't do it by myself. I can't remove these canvases off the wall by myself. It takes 2 or 3 people, sometimes really good friends, sometimes hired studio assistants to help me do this, and then tacking and stapling and unstapling and unanchoring and then repositioning. And so there is a kind of, there's a human work that goes into making these things that feels like you're carrying around a real body. And so in that way, I never feel disconnected from the very subjects that are in the works as I'm making them, if that makes any sense. Doubles, layers, and destruction. This is a big part of my process. For some strange reason, the creating and the doubling and the layering and then sometimes the destroying of really, really great pieces to complete a work. I call it destroying. I'll show you an example very soon. On the left, there's this study for what will later become the work called Tears for Icarus. And on the right is one of these bioforms that is the foundational rendering for Tears of Icarus. That drawing on the left begins during the pandemic, because the pandemic for many Black folks in the United States was not just a time when a microbe was wiping us out, right? It was a time when everybody was kind of glued to their screens and watching the next Black person get executed, like, for whatever. Like, that's the reality. And so for us, it was a strange window of time where we're watching death happen on 2 fronts, but we're watching the world watch what we're seeing, what we've been saying. And so that work on the left is extremely important as a image that comes before the biological psychiatry works. But it shows up, it winds up as a main feature in these works. I didn't know that was going to happen, right? And it stayed that way, the image that you're seeing right now on the left stayed that way for some months. I thought that was going to be the image I was going to submit. And then the weeping Icarus figure, this Black boy, right, winged, but unable to fly at this time, weeping into his hands in one instance and catching his tears like a waterfall in the other instance, shows up. I had no control over this. There was no image source I was looking at. He happened. And so there's this human thing that keeps happening with the works, where my emotions take over the process of creating, right? And artists, a lot of what we do is actually quite scientific. You have to be a scientist to put together these layers and to not have your images fall away in the wrong way. But a lot of people have this idea that what we do is purely emotional. I promise you it is not. It's just work. It's a lot of work. Hey, you're going to the studio? That must be fun. It is not fun. It is work. It's work. Can I come see you at the studio? No. And so when these emotional moments happen, they're real. They're real. I had a moment. I was overwhelmed. And I wept as I was drawing Icarus. I won't spend too much time on this for the sake of time for us to have a conversation, but this is part of that destruction thing. Just know that the image on the right is where the image was going to be, this sleeping figure, right? And then I went into the studio and it's like, actually, no, there's more. I picked up the white charcoal, again, charcoal, and this happened, and it made so much more sense. The image on the left is the completed work. So there's this way that the risk of damaging or even destroying the layer underneath is part of this great reward system you get, with the final works for me. I'm sure there's a lot of science that is like that as well. And finally, the last two slides, and I'm gonna hold myself together to speak about this. It has everything to do, Dr. Crystal and Dr. Addy, with why this project is happening. First, I'll just speak to the gestures that you're seeing. Let me just remind you of something you're seeing here. You see that hand on the left image, that hand that's coming up to the chest of the final image? It's a small hand. It's the last thing I added to this image, and that's when I knew it was finished. There's this way that hands and gestures and the heart and the chest become a part of the conversation in this series of reminding us that we're dealing with human beings, which I think is really what you meant to do, Dr. Crystal, right? It's like, yeah, we're centering Black people. No, we're all humans here. Let's have a conversation. And so these works began to speak to each other. In these particular works here, they began to echo that sentiment. The work on the left with this prayer, right? We're talking about apocalypse. We're talking about a figure being overcome with color and other things that represent the erasure of the identity of this young man, who I happen to know, this model, his erasure because of all of the psychological things he's dealing with. But there's this prayer, there's this acknowledgement of faith. And also in another image here, not Tears of Icarus, I have the wrong one there. It's Heir Apparent. This same gesture is mirrored. Also here, the hand is holding a flower. This reminder, again, of the human quality in all of this. And finally, the last two images, and the final thing I'll say is Dr. Crystal, you set out to have us use these images as a way to have a conversation about centering Black stories, right? Centering Black and brown stories. I know your heart is bigger than that. It's bigger. You're really thinking like there's got to be a way we rethink all of this. But let's start here. Let's start with Black stories. You don't have to say it. I know. And I have to tell you, as I worked on this project, and by the end, when I saw everything, it was about the human condition. That's all it was. It was about recognizing that we all need to be recognized. It's about embracing our frailties, right? We're literally falling apart as we get older, and there's something horrifying about that, but there's something beautiful about that too. Everything decays. These canvases won't be here forever. But somehow, having a conversation about why these bodies matter now and remembering that we're human is a big part of this. And I just want to thank you so much for opening up my heart to this possibility, because I've grown because of it. Thank you. That's it.
that is a tough act to follow. But I think you can really appreciate and start to appreciate just the relational aspect that went into this project as well, even as you heard both of them talk about motivation and how we crafted things together. So, Imal, just greatly indebted to you for the way that you've put yourself into this work and for how important it's been to you, and John for just the initiative and the inquisitiveness and commitment and authenticity. I think those are things that came out as well. So one thing that I want to do, because you've heard a little bit about that from both of them, but give you all a window into how this process emerged, and also talk a little bit more about some of the details and how the practical pieces came to be. I don't know if I should divulge this or not, but I'll take the fault for adding the scientific layer.
Yes, I'm glad you
to Imal's presentation as we were talking about ways to really communicate this in an effective manner. I think it's also speaks volumes about the importance of these types of collaborative projects. Even as I was coming over to the hotel yesterday and having a conversation with a Lyft driver who happened to have a degree in philosophy, knew a lot about psychiatry and neuroscience, but also felt frustrated at the siloing in academia. Mm-hmm. So for me, as we got out of the car, the last thing I mentioned to him was this specific project, and to see his excitement. I mean, he basically, it's almost like he was gonna bounce out of his chair with his excitement about, that's what we need. So again, I think this is just, it goes a long way to just what we need to do as a society, and a society of biopsychiatry, but broadly as a society as well. I think it speaks volumes. So before I get into more of the conversation with these two, I did want to give you all just a little bit of a sense of how these conversations went. For me, one thing I mentioned to both of them this week, I was pleasantly surprised by how similar these two individuals are in ways that I did not expect. So the meetings we had together, it's almost as if you were sitting at a dinner table with a psychiatrist and researcher and an artist, and having them share authentically about the things they were passionate about. There were so many times when John would share about some aspects of psychiatric illness or things that we're trying to do to move the field forward, and you could see Imal's eyes just lighting up even as he divulged his early interest in neuroscience. Or to hear Imal talk about different aspects of the art, and to hear John start to talk about things that he appreciated about art, things that he knew about art, and just to see them riff off one another was a little bit surreal to me. I don't think I've still quite grasped it. And you could sense a little bit of that even as they were both talking. You could see how they were responding to one another. So not something that I would have expected per se, but something that I think has been really generative as well, even as they talked about topics of neuroscience and psychiatry, mental health in society, mental health in Black and brown communities, aspects of art. And so I think, as Imal and John both mentioned, this is something that really developed out of a community conversation. And just to give you another practical piece, there were so many times after we'd have our calls on Zoom when John would actually stop by my office, sit on the, this is ironic, but sit on the sofa chair or the couch in the office, this is the psychiatry department, and just share with me how excited he was about the work that Imal was doing, how excited he was about the conversations, how important this was to the field. And on the same token, after having those conversations, get a text or a call from Imal talking about how much this meant to him, how he could really sense John's passion and John's authenticity in this moment, and even times when some of these conversations even brought him to tears, as he talked about. So it's really been a process that we've been able to do collaboratively as a team. I feel fortunate to have been able to facilitate that conversation, and something that I'd say I've also learned from and grown from as well, even as I'm a little bit astounded by their knowledge of each other's fields. So maybe a rubric for us to think about as society as well. But just to jump into the conversation between the two of them, one of the themes that you heard that came up, and I think that you can appreciate, is aspects of risk, how that happens in our research and scientific endeavors, how that happens in the art. But I would also say there was an aspect of risk that both of them had to take to actually engage in this type of collaborative project in the first place. And so I actually wanted to pose that question to both of you, if you could actually just elaborate on what some of those risks were for you and how you navigate through that. Maybe John, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for your comments, Nate. I was so focused on the aims of what we were trying to accomplish that I only realized I would have to deal with the risk afterwards. In other words, for example, we went pretty far along in the discussions, before I knew whether or not I would have the money to pay for the artworks. so you know, we were launching onto something that we really couldn't chart the course for at the start, and it was just wonderful. You know, that when we raised this idea with the leadership of the society, that it was there was so much enthusiasm, because that made it manage that part of the risk, and then the other part of the risk is I had no idea what the paintings were going to look like, what the artworks were going to look like. A big risk. You know,
Neither did I, apparently.
But you know, one of the things about risk, and maybe we could have Nora Volkow discuss this. It's part of the excitement as well. You know, you don't know how it's going to turn out. It's an adventure, and not knowing everything how everything's going to turn out at the end is part of the excitement of going in. So that's my sense of risk.
Yeah, really well said. Emo, what about you?
Yeah, I too did not know what the images were going to look like, and I mean, and so I knew that based off of our conversations that you trusted, based off of our conversations and based off of my past work, you trusted enough to not ask for preliminary sketches per se, you know, which I think gave me the freedom to allow this to evolve into what it needed to be. The original works I was going to present were going to look quite different from these because I was experimenting with the new material and I really wanted this. I was trying to make it work, so I spent the entire summer like trying to make this new material work. And someone finally pulled me aside and it's like, Ima, what you're doing here is good work, but it's clear that it's not ready for the public yet. Like, why don't you do what you do? And I was like, I can? So I after that talk with another artist, it gave me the freedom to do what I do, right? And I'm still working with those other materials. All of this is to say that because you gave me this kind of room, you know, it allowed me to just explore, to really figure out how to have this conversation. And by the last two images, which are, I think, my favorite in the series, Heir Apparent and Tears for Icarus, I was completely myself. I was no longer concerned. There was no fear. Those were risk-free works. I was like, I'm just gonna, I have to draw something over this? Okay. And I just went for it. And those works came, I think those are my signature style works in that you got the real me. Not that these other works aren't me, but those works have a portion of me that is the guy that would jump out of the airplane with a parachute, right? But my wife would do that for free. I don't do things like that, people. So that's a big deal for me to get that version of me. So I think the risk for me has been very rewarding, and I enjoy all of the mistakes I made along the way because I've learned so much. I've learned so much through them.
Wow, that's great. I mean, and again, so many parallels between both of your comments as well. And I think it also still speaks to time. Things take time. You both talked about building trust, building community, but it still took time to get to that place. And even obviously it took time to have conversations about funding the work. It took time for you to get to a place where you felt like you were being yourself authentically, even though you weren't necessarily trying to hold that back, but having other community conversations as well. And so that all seems like it was part of the process. Mm-hmm. I'm also curious for people to hear how you decided, I mean, some of the things came to you, but how you decided on what materials to use, what the images would look like, and how the conversations between you and John actually facilitated that process.
Oh, yeah. What I liked about speaking to you, Dr. Crystal, was just you didn't hold back when it came to talking about the emotional aspects of the various, disorders or issues that we come. He's like, no, blue can mean this. And I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah, there was you wanted to talk about the art part of this, and you were excited to. So for me, that liberated my hand to play with colors more and to play with these different lines and materials. So the charcoal portion of this, and I told you this, but I think everybody should hear it. The charcoal portion of this, I did not know these works were all going to look like this with charcoal, such a heavy use of charcoal, both black and white charcoal. I wasn't aware that they were all going to look so similar. So it was only till I got to the final work, and they were all photographed, that I looked and I was like, oh my God, it really is a series. Like, it's a series. And, which is good for all of us, but, it takes a ton of chemical effort to hold charcoal down to an unstretched canvas. Sprays of different kinds, and asthma attacks and headaches, sorry, that's on me, and ventilation and spraying it again. And there's a way that you have to hold the charcoal, because charcoal, it's like dust. And so sometimes I would work on an aspect of this thing and literally blow on it, and it would be gone. I'm like, oh, I can't do that again. So there is a way that each thing you're doing, you're like, man, I'm really happy about what I did to that hand, yesterday. And you're hoping when you get to the studio, it'll still be a hand, right? And so, why charcoal? Why use something that is so impermanent? At the end of the series, I fell in love with the frailty of the works. That is to say, they're fixed, they're held, they're fine, they're museum ready, they will be fine. But there's a way that they're not permanent works, right? They're moving, they're always moving. When these works are transported to the National Academy of Sciences, they will be slightly, even on a micro kind of level, right? They will be somehow different. Little fragments will have come off, and I've embraced that part of this project because it is an honest conversation about who we are as human beings. And so the materials for me are such a big part of this in telling the honest story.
Any reactions, John, as you are hearing email?
Sure.
Rehash some of that?
Sure. This was, in relation to our discussions, this idea of conveying the experience of what psychiatric disorders are like for people, that was an important part of it. So this use of this extremely visceral means of conveying feeling and image, I thought was really interesting. And the evanescent part of it, this possibility that the whole work would blow away, I just thought was really, I hadn't appreciated it until after we had the discussions later, another element of the ephemeral nature of experience that I thought you conveyed. I'm wondering if we should open it up for more discussion, because I think we may be running short of time.
Yep, so that's actually our time to switch. So we're in good
Oh,
state.
we're good? Oh, all right.
Okay, good. Okay.
That's my scientific mind again.
Okay, good.
So before we pivot there, one question, and maybe this isn't a fair question to both of you because I'm asking this as a non-artist, so I will own that if it goes south. But I'm curious if there are specific things for both of you that you're hoping people will take from the images and from the series.
You're looking at me first.
I am.
Like the takeaway?
If there is one.
The main takeaway is the one that I got from this. It's the one that makes me the most emotional about this. It's so awful that we're in a time when we have to be reminded that we're human beings. And this is a wonderful time to be having this conversation. The world, again, is on fire. The world's been on fire a lot lately. So I guess the world we see, the world that is reported, right, is on fire again. And I think to stress that we are humans, that outside of our ideologies, our race, our histories, it's like, you know, if I kick your shin, you're gonna be like, ow, that hurts. Like, we're humans, right? And there's something that alone should connect us. That is my takeaway from this, that these works feel like humans that need to be cared for in a particular way. They need to be sustained. They have to be fed and taken care of to be held together. And I hope that people walk away, if not from the project, certainly from this presentation and any others that we choose to do, realizing that this series really is somehow a larger conversation about who we are. And while they're Black figures that I used, I have, as the artist, I've walked away understanding this is not a Black project. This is something much bigger, and I'm so eternally grateful for having been a part of it.
Wow, really well said.
What he said. You know, the sense of, so I started out with the feeling of a gap, of an absence, of a sadness that we, as a field, as a society, as a journal, were failing to include everyone in our effort towards dealing with the burden of mental illness and brain diseases. And this small step of trying to be more welcoming toward the time when we can all just be together, that there's room for everybody and everybody counts. And I really felt that these covers made you think about that.
Yep.
Wonderful. And thanks again to both of you for just, I mean, I've said it several times, but your mutual investment in this project as well. So I want to go ahead and open it up to any questions or comments that you all have as well. And I believe there are microphones. So yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for putting this session together and for this creative initiative. It's really inspiring to also hear how it started, that just from such authentic feelings and from all of our, you know, common experiences of being excluded one way or the other. And what's interesting about this work is that, you know, psychiatry is famous for having started with Rorschach tests. And I feel that your work is kind of another type of Rorschach test for all of us. So one thing I noticed, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that. Actually, two things I've noticed. One is the prominence of having faces with, you know, heads and hands. And to me, that's very symbolic of science, that we think and then we do. And the work is kind of an evolving canvas where some stuff goes away, we don't replicate it, and some stuff stays. So it's like really interesting to see that translated into art. So I don't know if you meant it, but. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is the prominence of the color red in your paintings. Initially, my first reaction was you're kind of pointing to violence. It's blood, it's suffering. And I just don't know if that's how you thought about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The prominence of the color red, I'll start backwards, is in these particular works, it wasn't about violence at all. Wow, I love, this is why you need question and answer, because yeah, I wasn't thinking violence as much as I was thinking blood, but I was thinking about the life source, almost like those abstracted forms that I create, the thing that's inside of us that kind of makes other things happen or move or operate. And blood could be that, but the red here could just be the essence of life itself for me. So that explains the color red. The hands and I remember my mom coming. I showed her a project of mine in junior high school, and she's like, "All you draw is faces, faces, faces." My mom was Nigerian. What is all these faces? I've been doing this face thing and hands thing for a long time now. I want to tell you something like, yes, the face and the hands are the. I just really enjoy. They mean something to me. I'm not a portrait artist per se, but I do think that there is. I do think that there's something in not portraiture, but in the human facial composition and hands and gesturings. There's so many things you can say with hands. For those of us who talk with hands, and for just hands that are just, I love using them as communicators in my work. And in other works, I use the entire body as this way to communicate an idea, where the body can tell a story with different poses.
So here's my association. I'm not an artist, but when I was a first-year medical student, I was in gross anatomy. The two parts that were the hardest to work on, because they were so unalterably human, were the face and the hands. And so I think these are the most intensely human parts of our bodies and most hit you most powerfully.
That may be the reason why I'm so drawn to it.
Yeah.
That's great. You're seeing a bit of our process here on stage in real time as well. Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you for sharing your artwork. I really admire, especially the powerful matriarchal painting. And she has also shown me another one of your works that her department purchased. Thank you. I wanted to ask do you see collaborative art projects like this opening up even more opportunities and conversations in interdisciplinary, like medicinal approaches? Like, I know recently a Black medical student won an award for advocating for more Black and brown people in medical textbooks as anatomical figures, or like more inclusive art therapy.
Yes. Thank you so much. That's a wonderful question. My initial response is absolutely. I think that the remedies that we're going to see, whether they're medical remedies, scientific remedies, or just like social remedies, I think they're going to come by way of collaboration. I am so with all of the the commentary about each generation says, this next generation, we're all lost. The next generation of young people coming up understand collaboration. They have found a way to take the textbook and merge it with TikTok and merge it with something else to create things we've just never seen before, documentaries online in ways we've never seen them before. I do think that that collaborative work this way is the way to build pathways to remedy. There's that scientist you spoke of that won that award. I don't know their names off my head. There's another one I know who's from my area of Nigeria who he's an artist, but he makes prosthetic limbs. And some of you have probably seen videos of this guy and his work online. Like I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, I remember when this guy was now he's literally blowing up everywhere with these prosthetic limbs that he makes, but he's an artist. So he's found a way to bridge these two. The answer to your question is yes. I do think that there's a wonderful field of opportunities for collaborations like this. By the way, and also just on a pedagogical level, I think that this kind of work helps people understand things in a way they would not otherwise. This is going to sound really awful. Not really awful. This is going to sound strange, because this will be proof that I'm not really a scientist. One of the reasons why I did not move forward with my major, I wasn't going to be a major in neuroscience. I thought I was. I really did. I enjoyed it so much. Rods and cones is what stopped me. So I remember this. I got a C on my first test. That textbook had no color. And I was like, what is look, it really matters. I still have my textbooks from the other neuroscience courses. I love those textbooks. I loved learning, but I needed those images to look a certain way. I needed the drawings in there. As an artist learning this, I was excelling. I got to Rods and Cones, and they pulled out this 1970s textbook with nothing to help me differentiate, and I dropped it quickly. That sounds silly, but it's not so disconnected from what we're talking about, right? So there is a way forward. Now, I don't know if you want me to be a neuroscientist, but there is a way forward, at least in the field of pedagogy.
You are one now.
I am now.
I agree. Great story. Carrie, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this amazingly beautiful and important work, and thank you all for having this really impactful discussion, and I'm so proud to be part of a society and a journal that's involved with this. Thank you. I guess my question builds on the last one, which was, as you say, the world has been on fire, it feels like, the last couple of years, and it's at a stage where clearly it's not just unconscious racism, but overtly conscious racism and structural racism, where, is there. But that seems to be very correlated with the anti-science movement and in some ways anti-psychiatry movement. And I wonder if there's a way that this can be an example for neuroscience and psychiatry societies to work interdisciplinary, particularly with art, to help make inroads into these anti-science and racism problems. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You want to start?
I hope so.
It's a great question. I don't know if I don't know if I have the right answer for it outside of I hope so as well. I will say as a Christian man, there's a way that this anti-science rhetoric has. I don't understand it. As a Christian man, I still love science so much. I am a man of faith. I'm not just in word. Like I believe in God. I pray. I was certainly praying on that airplane yesterday. I pray. I pray. I believe this. I write my prayers down, and I'm certainly thrilled every time there is some new scientific discovery. I don't understand why the two don't exist together. And so for a lot of people, at least those who have the largest megaphones now. And so I'll agree in that I hope so. But yeah, that's my answer. I should have just done what you did. I should have said, I hope. Yeah.
I think it's a great comment. I think even in ways, something that comes up in a lot of these conversations, as we have panels like this, it's also important for us to all think about the influence we have in our spheres of influence and how we talk about these things. And even highlighting, not to center this project itself, but even highlighting something like this that exists and the ways that we can continue to lead by example in the ways that we talk about things with others, I think goes a long way as well. I don't know which of you was first. I'll let you all, okay, and then we'll go to you.
Hi, I just, thank you for holding this discussion, and I just was interested in if you could all comment in regards to how to kind of use this work to bring into more Black neuroscientists to this conversation, and how to kind of use this work to kind of engage in bringing more people to neuroscience and having more of these more nuanced conversations.
Look, there are three of us up here. I don't know how to answer this.
Yeah, I'll say maybe oversimplistically that the representation matters.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we are having this conversation, the fact that it's being recorded, some people will see this and say, oh, I can actually, to John and Emos, but I can see myself doing that because I now see somebody who is sitting in that role. To have an artist working with a psychiatrist. Certain schools I've gone to where people will just be very honest and say, oh, I only came to this because you're a Black neuroscientist. Wow. And I hadn't seen one before. So the fact that we can highlight that, the fact that there are many of us, there are some in this room, there are many of you in your programs who are bringing different people from different experiences, different lived experiences, to have these conversations and to do impactful work. I think one of the things that has shifted is our willingness to be able to highlight that in ways that so many different people can see, and then get back to that last comment, that we can normalize it and have conversations about that. So, yeah, great comment.
Yeah, we create the meaning of things that we do through action after the event. We process. So we have these covers. And to me, it's extremely important that we have this discussion in this society, because we're taking these abstract works of art, and they're now a part of the way all of you think about the Society of Biological Psychiatry and this field of endeavor that we're all engaged in. So to me, this process of continuing, keeping these images and making them alive will have effects that will live on. So I'm really grateful that we've had this opportunity to talk together with all of you. You know, I have to say, I was worried a little bit that it was going to be the three of us talking to each other with nobody else in the room. Yeah. And the fact that all of you came and participated and it was as important to you as it was to us it says a lot about who we are as a society and how open we are to have these kinds of discussions, which is really a wonderful thing, I think.
Do we have time for one more, or are we?
We're right up against it, but
Okay.
if there's one more question,
yeah.
I think if there's one more there, we'll take that.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. This was a great talk. It was phenomenal and super exciting. So I did this, it was a long time ago, but I watched this surrealist artist. He did this sculpture on like this African-American boy, and it was me and my family going to see it. And the first thing that like the lady beside me, she was like, wow, this guy's sagging. And like because you know, the sculpture, he had this, you know, his pants pulled down. And the first thing I noticed was that he had this like knife and his index finger was kind of probing the wound. So I think that was my first experience of really seeing that your background and your discipline kind of determines how you're perceiving, you know, the things you're looking at. So I was kind of curious if you saw any like trends differentially between the different disciplines that have been exposed to your work. Like, what does that feedback kind of look like so far?
Different I'm sorry. If give me the question again.
Yeah, so I'm curious as to what the feedback to your work looks like so far. Have you seen differences in how, you know, like one group, one specialty or discipline?
Okay, yes, I understand. Oh, yeah. Yes. I will. The short answer is there are many different groups. Definitely tend to see my works differently, different from each other. Sorry, I'm saying this incorrectly because I'm trying to speak quickly. So, the short answer is yes. We will probably have to have a longer conversation offline about it. But the short answer is yes. People tend to see it differently. Overall, though, most people who encounter my work do feel the spiritual element in it that I'm hoping that they sense. And that means a lot to me, because that doesn't always happen when you create. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emo, Neen, John. I know we discussed we weren't quite sure. This is wonderful. We're beyond the hour, and I'm sure we all feel we can go another hour, but it is time to go to the business meeting. Thank you again so much.